Now let's move on to asymmetric algorithm. All right. Now, asymmetric algorithm, we again have two users, user A and user B, and they want to communicate securely using asymmetric algorithm. All right. Because we found that there are some challenges with symmetric algorithms. It only provides confidentiality. It does not provide you authentication or non-repudiation. And there is this challenge of managing the keys as well, right? So maybe user A and user B say, all right, let's not go ahead with symmetric encryption. We are going to use asymmetric encryption. So in case of asymmetric encryption, what happens is there are two keys. In symmetric keys, there is just one key that is used between the two parties. But in asymmetric encryption, two keys are used. So user A will generate two keys. One will be a public key and one will be a private key. So let's give them names, pub A and private A. Similarly, user B also generates two keys. One will be a public key, let's say pub B, and one private key, which is private B. All right. So now these are two keys that each of these users have generated. So the point to remember is that public A is a key that is public key, okay, which means it can be made public. It can be distributed freely. There is no risk. There is no problem here if anybody gets hold of the public key. All right. But the private key must be kept private. It cannot be shared. It must not be shared with anybody other than user A, because user A is the owner of private key. So the private key must remain with user A and it must not be distributed with anybody. It should not be given to anybody. All right. Similarly, user B also has two keys, public B and private B. Public key can be given to anybody, but not private key. Now, they can exchange each other's public key. So user B will give his public key to user A. Now user A has got public key of B as well. And user A will give his public key to user B. And now user B has got a third key, which is public A. All right. And now what they can do is, uh, if user A wants to send a message securely to user B, user A will take this message, plain text message, and encrypt it using the public key which was received from user B. This is the public key of user B, right? Pub B. So it will encrypt this message using this key and then send the ciphertext message to user B. Now, when user B receives this encrypted message, which is encrypted, it will decrypt that message using which key? Using his own private key, because this message was encrypted using the corresponding public key, right? So the only key that can be used to decrypt this message is the corresponding private key. All right. Again, user A wants to send a message to user B. User A takes the public key of user B, which is pub B here, and encrypts the message using the other side's, the receiver's public key. When the receiver gets this message, the receiver will decrypt it using his own private key, because the message was encrypted using the corresponding public key, and the only key that can be used to decrypt it is the corresponding private key. All right. Now, even if somebody were to get hold of this encrypted message, let's say there is an attacker here, and if this attacker were to get hold of this encrypted message, the attacker will not be able to decrypt it, right? Because what key can be used to decrypt this message? The only key that can be used to decrypt this message is the corresponding private key, and which is that key is not shared with anyone. All right. So in symmetric and encryption algorithm, it was just one key that was used for both encryption and decryption purposes. But in case of asymmetric algorithm, one key is used for encryption and a second corresponding or related key is used for decryption purposes. All right. So that is how asymmetric encryption works. One quick note here. Uh, okay, yeah, let me explain that as well quickly. Now, what user A could have done is, user A could have encrypted this message with his own private key as well and sent it across. Then, which key would be used to decrypt it? if the user A has encrypted this message with his own private key. Now the key that can be used to decrypt this message encrypted with the sender's private key, the key that can be used to decrypt this message is the sender's public key, right? Because this was encrypted using the sender's private key. Now it can only be decrypted using the sender's public key. So when user B receives this message, this encrypted message, user B will decrypt it using user A's, the sender's public key. All right. So that is also possible. So don't think that only public key can be used for encryption, not private key. That is not the case. Any key can be used for encryption and decryption purposes. It depends on what the purpose is. Now in this case there is a problem, because let's say if this message is traveling over the network and if it is intercepted by the attacker can decrypt this message, right? Why is that? Because this message can only be decrypted by the sender's public key, which is pub A, right? And this public key is available to anyone because it is public. So it is freely available. It can be found in various key repositories. So attacker will be able to decrypt this message, all right, if the attacker has access to the public key of the sender. But the goal in this case of this the goal of the sender in this case would not be to provide confidentiality. So user A fully knows that if user A sends the message by encrypting this message with his own private key, anybody would be able to decrypt it. User A would know that fully, but user A would still use this option if user A wants to prove to user B that it was only user A who had sent this message and nobody else, right? Because when user B receives this message, and if user B is able to successfully decrypt this message using the public key of A, then that means the only person who could have encrypted it, or the only key that could have been used to encrypt it, is the corresponding private key. And that private key is with user A. It is not supposed to be shared with anybody, right? So this will provide you authentication, right? So just wanted to mention that any key can be used for encryption and decryption. Don't think that only public key can be used for encryption. All right. I know it can be slightly confusing at times, but that's how it is. Okay. Let's see what else there is. So the first one is each user has two keys, one public key and one private key. Like I explained, public key can be known to anyone, but private key must be known and used only by the owner. If a public key is used to encrypt the message, then the corresponding private key must be used to decrypt the message, and vice versa, like I just explained. But if it is so good, then why do we use symmetric algorithms? Why don't we just use asymmetric algorithms? The problem with asymmetric algorithms is that they are CPU intensive. They take a lot of processor power, and they take a lot of resources. So they are a lot slower than the symmetric algorithms. All right. And they can provide you confidentiality as well as authentication and non-repudiation, as I just explained. Because if the sender sends something by encrypting the message with his own private key, then that will provide authentication and non-repudiation as well, right? Because nobody else could have sent that message by encrypting it with the private key, because nobody else has that private key. So it provides authentication and non-repudiation as well. All right. And it's also known as public key cryptography. So if you see the term public key cryptography, it means they are talking about asymmetric encryption. Some examples are RSA, ECC, Diffie-Hellman, and DSS. So these are some asymmetric algorithms. All right.